The summer of 2018 was a scorcher, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer. We were driving the winding back roads near my parents' house, me, my boyfriend Ethan, and my mom's partner Gary, when we spotted it. The old Midvale Ironworks loomed at the edge of the woods, a rusting carcass half swallowed by ivy and neglect. Its smokestacks jutted into the sky like skeletal fingers, the factory's crumbling facade daring us to come closer. Ethan leaned forward between the seats, eyes bright with curiosity. "Have you ever been in there?" Gary, always up for a bit of mischief, pulled over onto the gravel shoulder without hesitation. "Nope," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Want to find out?" A minute later, we were hiking through the knee-high weeds, shoes crunching over shards of glass and ancient bolts. The factory loomed above us, its windows shattered and walls pockmarked with graffiti. I had driven past it 100 times, but seeing it up close was different, more unsettling. The kind of place where silence hung thick, as if the world held its breath. We found a gap in the chain-link fence and slipped through. The main door was barred shut, but a side entrance had long since been pried open. We ducked inside, pushing past a sagging metal door, and the chill hit us immediately. It was like stepping through an invisible wall. One moment we were in the sticky grip of summer. The next we were plunged into a cold that sank right through our skin. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. "How is it this cold in here?" I muttered. "Old building, maybe there's a basement," Gary said, but his voice lacked confidence. There were holes in the roof, gaping wounds that let in slashes of sunlight. Wind whistled through cracks in the walls, but it wasn't enough to explain the biting cold. The inside was a wasteland of twisted metal and rotting wood. Conveyor belts slumped under layers of dust, and old machines sat half disassembled, their gears scattered like bones. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Ethan and Gary wandered off to explore a side room, but something drew me away. A row of rusting filing cabinets, half buried under debris. I pulled open a drawer, and papers spilled out, yellowed and brittle. Invoices, worker IDs, order sheets. Everything was left behind, as if the place had shut down overnight. Most of the documents were from the late 90s to the early 2000s. One invoice, dated 2003, lay on top of a pile of shipping orders, all packed and ready to go but never sent. "Hey, this is weird," I called out. Gary and Ethan returned, their expressions mirroring my unease. "This place looks like it's been abandoned for 50 years, Ethan said, nudging a rusted coffee mug with his foot. "But 2003? That's only, 16 years?" We stood in the debris-strewn office, our breath misting in the cold. I couldn't shake the feeling that the place was wrong, not just decayed or forgotten, but wrong, like the walls themselves were waiting, listening. My instincts prickled, a quiet alarm beneath my skin. The air felt heavy, pressing in. I took a step back, and the room seemed to lean with me. "We should go," I said, trying to sound casual. Gary and Ethan didn't argue. None of us had seen or heard anything, no creaks, no whispers, but we all felt it, an unseen force urging us to leave, to escape before something woke up. We retraced our steps, slipping through the shadows, and just as we reached the door, I felt it, a prickle on the back of my neck. The sense of being watched. I glanced back, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood in the doorway we had just exited. Its outline was vague, like a smudge on an old photograph. It was human-shaped, but not quite right. Its limbs were too long, its posture slightly off, as if it had only seen humans from a distance and was trying to imitate us. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Ethan and I locked eyes, and I knew he saw it too. Gary, focused on the car and the crunch of gravel beneath his boots, didn't notice. We climbed into the car, and as Gary turned the key, the engine sputtered to life, breaking the eerie silence. The figure remained in the doorway, unmoving, watching. Ethan and I stared straight ahead as the car pulled away. My pulse thundered in my ears. The factory shrank in the rearview mirror, but the cold lingered, burrowing into my bones. When we hit the main road, Gary finally broke the silence. "You two all right?" "Yeah," Ethan said too quickly. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white against his jeans. I didn't say a word. Even now, I can't make sense of what we saw. I pass the old factory often, its dark windows staring out like empty eye sockets. But every time I drive by, that feeling returns. A weight pressing down on my chest, a chill that seeps into my bones. I know, deep down, that whatever stood in that doorway is still there, hidden in the dark, waiting for someone else to wander inside. It was just another Friday night at the Red Lantern, the kind of bar where dim lights and soft music made the world outside feel miles away. I was nestled among friends, drinks in hand, our laughter blending with the warm hum of conversation. Everything felt right until I saw him. He sat at the far end of the bar, alone. His drink sat untouched, glass sweating against the polished wood, while everyone else tapped on their phones or leaned into conversations. He just sat there, staring at me. His gaze was a frozen line, unblinking, hollow, and so still it sent a shiver crawling beneath my skin. I tried to focus on my friends, but his stare felt like a weight pressing down on me. My laughter turned forced, my responses hollow. At first I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was zoning out, lost in his own world. But as the minutes dragged on, his gaze burned through the room, and my skin prickled with unease. I whispered to Sarah, sitting next to me, and she threw a glance over her shoulder. "Creepy," she muttered. "Want me to say something?" I shook my head. "I'll handle it." Determined to break whatever weird trance he was in, I stood up, squared my shoulders, and walked straight over. "Can I help you?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Do I even know you?" He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. His eyes remained fixed on some point just beyond me, glassy and vacant. The longer I stood there, the more the air around us seemed to thicken. "That's what I thought," I said, turning on my heel. I had barely taken a step when his voice slid through the air, smooth and flat. "Your hair smells nice, Lisa." I froze. Ice crawled up my spine. I hadn't told him my name. Without a word, I bolted for the door. My friends called after me, their voices muffled by the roaring in my ears. I burst into the cool night air, my pulse racing. As I shoved open the heavy door, I glanced back. He was gone. The stool where he had sat was empty, the bar stool still gently swaying. I fumbled for my keys as I ran to my car. The parking lot was a sea of shadows, and every dark corner felt like it held a set of eyes. My breath came in ragged bursts, and when I finally slid into the driver's seat, I slammed the door and hit the locks, my hands trembling. I barely had time to start the engine before I heard the tap. Soft, deliberate, glass against glass. I screamed. He was there, his face pressed against my window, pale and expressionless. His lips moved, mouthing words I couldn't hear. My instincts kicked in and I slammed the car into reverse, the tires screeching against the pavement. But before I could move, the door was wrenched open. He grabbed me by the hair, yanking me out of the car. Pain lanced through my scalp, and I hit the ground hard, gravel biting into my skin. "Let go!" I thrashed against him, but he was strong, too strong. He dragged me to a beat-up van parked nearby, its back doors gaping open like a hungry mouth. My nails scraped against the ground, leaving useless trails in the dirt. I tried to scream, but his hand clamped over my mouth, pressing down until my vision danced with stars. He threw me into the back of the van, metal tools clattering around me. The smell of oil and rust filled my nose, choking me. The door slammed shut, and darkness swallowed me whole. The ride was a blur of sharp turns and muffled sounds. My hands scrambled for anything to defend myself with, and I found a wrench, cold and heavy. I gripped it, knuckles white, and waited. When the van stopped, his footsteps echoed as he circled around. The doors opened, and pale light poured in, outlining his silhouette. He climbed in, slow and methodical, as if he had all the time in the world. His hand reached for me, and I swung the wrench with everything I had. It connected with a sickening crunch. He let out a scream, high-pitched, raw, more animal than human. I didn't think. I lunged over him, my body fueled by pure adrenaline. My hands scraped against the metal as I scrambled out of the van, hitting the wet pavement hard. We were in an abandoned industrial lot, Shadows draped over crumbling warehouses, their shattered windows staring down like empty eyes. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. Behind me, his footsteps pounded, uneven, frantic, each step sharper than the last, echoing off the rusted walls and chasing me into the dark. The sun was sinking, draping the forest in twisted shadows as I trudged through the thick underbrush. I wasn't lost, I repeated it like a mantra, but the trail had vanished beneath a patchwork of damp leaves, and the distant hum of civilization had melted into silence. Then I saw it. An old cabin sat hunched among the trees, its wood gray and splintering, shingles hanging like loose teeth from the sagging roof. I stopped, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Every instinct told me to turn around, to fight my way back through the brush until I found the path again. But curiosity, sharp and insistent, nudged me forward. The door resisted, then groaned open, exhaling a breath of stale, damp air. Rot clung to my skin as I stepped inside. Shafts of dying light slipped through the broken windows, catching dust motes that swirled in the stillness. Each step sent a shiver through the floorboards, their groans a low, mournful warning. I wandered through the cramped rooms, taking in the remnants of a life long abandoned. A rusted stove in the corner, a toppled chair, the brittle remains of curtains that crumbled at my touch. It felt like the world had moved on and left this place behind, a tomb for forgotten memories. In what might have been a bedroom, I found it, a small leather-bound journal resting on a warped nightstand. My fingers brushed the cover, and a shiver traced my spine. The leather was worn, edges gnawed by time and perhaps by something else. I opened it. The handwriting inside was spidery, erratic. The first few entries were mundane, mentions of hunting trips, solitary winters, and the struggle to keep the cold at bay. But as I flipped through, the tone changed. The words became jagged, slashing across the page. The writer spoke of whispers in the night, shadows slipping between the trees, and eyes, so many eyes, watching from the darkness. The final entry was little more than a frantic scrawl. It comes at night. I see it, I hear it, I think it's inside. A chill sank into my bones, and I snapped the journal shut. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. I needed to leave, now. I turned, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, darker than the dimness around it, lingering just beyond the doorway. It stood motionless, an absence of light, a cutout in reality. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move, couldn't think. The shadow shifted, gliding silently into the hallway. Its form was wrong, humanoid but warped, as if the darkness itself had been stretched over a broken frame. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the edge of the bed. I crashed to the floor, the journal slipping from my grasp. My mind screamed at my body to run, but fear anchored me to the ground. The cabin seemed to hum, a low resonant vibration that gnawed at my sanity. The shadow paused, and though it had no eyes, I knew it was looking at me. It knew me. Finally, adrenaline surged through the paralysis. I scrambled to my feet, bolting through the room and slamming into the hallway. The front door loomed ahead, a rectangle of dying light, and I threw myself toward it. Every step felt like wading through tar, the air heavy and wet. I didn't dare look back. My only thought was to run, to put as much distance as possible between me and that cabin. I crashed through the door and into the dense forest, the cool air burning my lungs. Branches tore at my skin, roots curled around my ankles, but I pushed forward, my mind replaying those last moments in the cabin, trying to make sense of the shadows that had seemed to breathe. But the feeling wouldn't leave me, the prickling at the back of my neck, the weight of unseen eyes. Even as daylight clung to the forest, I knew, deep down, that I wasn't alone. The shadow had followed me, and it was only waiting for nightfall.